Imagine a king so consumed by jealousy, so haunted by the ghost of his father's greatness, that he decides he must conquer the unconquerable. But he doesn't just want to defeat armies and take land. He wants to wage war on a nation's very soul. He wants to march into the most ancient kingdom on earth and put its gods on trial to prove that his power is greater than theirs. This is the story of Cambyses II, the second king of kings of the Persian Empire. He is a man history has tried to forget, a ruler whose story is not one of glorious conquest, but of a terrifying descent into madness. A man who didn't just want to rule Egypt, he wanted to humiliate it, to break its spirit, and to kill its sacred deities with his own two hands. You are about to learn the story of a king whose paranoia led him to destroy his own family, whose rage led him to defile holy temples, and whose arrogance led him to commit an act so shocking it was said the heavens themselves cursed him for it. This is the documented historical account of the mad king of Persia, whose bizarre and brutal reign proves that the most dangerous man isn't the one who wants power, but the one who is terrified he doesn't deserve it.
Part 1. The Shadow of a Giant. Our story begins not with Cambyses, but with his father, Cyrus the Great. It's impossible to understand the son without first understanding the legend of the father. Cyrus was more than a king. He was a phenomenon. He founded the Achaemenid Empire, the largest empire the world had ever seen, stretching from the shores of Greece to the mountains of India. But he was known less for the size of his empire and more for the revolutionary way he ruled it. In an age of brutal conquerors, Cyrus was known for his mercy. When he conquered Babylon, he didn't burn the city or enslave its people. Instead, he freed the captive populations, including the Jewish people, allowing them to return to their homeland and rebuild their temple. He respected the local customs and religions of the lands he conquered. He was seen as a liberator, a father to his people, a figure so universally admired that even his enemies, the Greeks, wrote about him with grudging respect for centuries. Now, imagine being his son. Imagine growing up in the shadow of a living legend. Every day of your life, you are reminded that you are the son of the greatest man in the world. Every courtier, every general, every foreign ambassador who looks at you is secretly comparing you to him. This was the world of Cambyses II. He inherited the throne in 530 BC, handed the keys to the largest, most powerful, and wealthiest empire on the planet. But he hadn't built it. He hadn't bled for it. He had simply been born into it. And the weight of that inheritance began to fester within him, turning into a toxic brew of insecurity, jealousy, and paranoia.
One of the first acts of his reign, according to the Greek historian Herodotus, was to deal with the person he saw as his greatest rival, his own brother, Smerdis. Smerdis was said to be everything Cambyses was not. He was charismatic, popular with the people, and physically impressive. Herodotus tells a story that Smerdis was the only Persian who could draw a famously powerful bow sent as a gift from the king of Ethiopia. Cambyses, seeing this, was consumed by jealousy. He couldn't stand the thought of someone so capable, so beloved, existing within his own family. So, while preparing for the greatest military campaign of his life, the invasion of Egypt, he did something that would haunt him forever. He sent his brother back to Persia and had him secretly taken care of. No one knew. The official story was that Smerdis had returned to the capital, but in reality, the king's brother was gone, the first victim of Cambyses' spiraling paranoia. With his family rival out of the way, Cambyses turned his full attention to the one great prize that had eluded his father, the ancient kingdom of Egypt. Egypt was the oldest and wealthiest civilization in the known world. For thousands of years, it had stood proud and mysterious, a land ruled by god-kings and protected by a pantheon of powerful deities. Conquering Egypt wouldn't just be a military victory, it would be a symbolic one. It would be the one thing Cambyses could do that his legendary father had not. It would be his chance to finally step out of Cyrus's shadow and cast his own. He spent years meticulously planning the invasion, assembling a massive army, and, in a stroke of genius, building a navy from scratch with the help of the Phoenicians and Greeks under his rule. He made alliances with Arabian chieftains to ensure his army would have water while crossing the brutal Sinai desert. But his most clever and perhaps most disturbing strategy was reserved for the first major battle at the fortress city of Pelusium. You don't learn this in history classes out there, but Cambyses understood the soul of his enemy. He knew that the Egyptians worshipped many animals as sacred, and the most sacred of all was the cat, the living symbol of the goddess Bastet. Harming a cat in Egypt was a crime punishable by death. So Cambyses ordered his men to gather as many cats as they could find. When his army advanced on the walls of Pelusium, they did so with a living shield. According to one account, the Persian soldiers painted cats on their shields. According to a more shocking account, they held live cats in their arms. The Egyptian archers on the walls were paralyzed. They could not shoot for fear of harming the sacred animals. They were forced to watch as the Persian army marched untouched right up to their gates. Cambyses had weaponized their faith against them. He had turned their deepest piety into their greatest weakness. Pelusium fell, and the road to the heart of Egypt was wide open. But this victory, as brilliant as it was not a sign of a benevolent ruler like his father. It was a sign of a cold, calculating mind, a mind that saw faith not as something to be respected, but as a tool to be manipulated. The war for Egypt's land was over before it had barely begun. The war on its gods, however, was just getting started.
Part 2. The War on the Gods. With the Egyptian army shattered at Pelusium, the Persian forces swept down the Nile. The pharaoh, a young and inexperienced ruler named Psamtik III, was captured and the conquest of Egypt was complete. For any other king, this would have been the moment of ultimate triumph. Cambyses had achieved what his father, the great Cyrus, had only dreamed of. He was now the ruler of the two greatest civilizations on earth, Persia and Egypt. He should have been magnanimous in victory, following his father's famous model of mercy and respect. He did the exact opposite. What followed was not a celebration of conquest, but a horrifying campaign of psychological cruelty designed to break the spirit of the Egyptian people by showing them that their new king feared nothing, not even their gods. His first target was the captured pharaoh himself. Cambyses seemed to take a twisted pleasure in devising a series of humiliations for Psamtik. According to Herodotus, Cambyses forced the defeated king to sit in the suburbs of the city and watch a parade of his own people's suffering. First, he had the pharaoh's daughter, along with the daughters of other high-ranking Egyptian nobles, dressed in the clothes of slaves and forced to carry water from the Nile. The Egyptian nobles watching the spectacle of their defiled children wept and wailed, but Psamtik sat in silence, his head bowed to the ground. Next, Cambyses had the pharaoh's son, along with 2,000 other young Egyptian men of the same age, march past with ropes around their necks on their way to be executed in retaliation for a Persian death. The crowd of Egyptians cried out in despair, but again, Psamtik remained silent, his face a mask of stoic grief. Finally, Cambyses paraded one of the pharaoh's old friends, now a beggar in rags, before him. At the sight of his friend's pathetic state, the pharaoh finally broke. He cried out his friend's name and began to weep uncontrollably. When Cambyses asked him why he cried for a beggar but not for his own son and daughter, the pharaoh replied with a devastating statement. "My own misfortunes were too great for tears, but the grief of my friend was a sorrow I could weep for." This response, so full of dignity in the face of absolute despair, seemed to enrage Cambyses rather than move him. It was a dignity he could not break, and it fueled his fury against all of Egypt.
This fury soon found a new target. While Cambyses was in the capital of Memphis, a great celebration broke out among the Egyptian people. They put on their finest clothes and began to rejoice. Cambyses, steeped in his own paranoia, immediately assumed they were celebrating his misfortunes, perhaps laughing at his failed military expeditions which were already underway. He summoned the leaders of Memphis and demanded to know why they were celebrating. They explained that it was a sacred festival. Their god, Apis, had finally appeared among them. Here we must understand something crucial. The Apis bull was not just a symbol. To the Egyptians, it was a god, period. Periodically, a sacred bull calf would be born with very specific divine markings: a black coat, a white triangle on its forehead, a mark like an eagle on its back, and a scarab-like lump under its tongue. When this calf was found, it was believed that the soul of Osiris had been reborn on earth. The bull was housed in a magnificent temple, worshipped by priests, and its appearance was the most joyous event in the Egyptian religious calendar. This explanation did not satisfy Cambyses. He called it a lie and ordered the leaders executed for their insolence.
Then he demanded to see this god for himself. The priests, trembling with fear, brought the Apis bull into his presence. Cambyses looked up the sacred animal, a creature revered as a living deity for thousands of years, and he laughed. He called the Egyptians fools for worshiping a beast. Then, in a fit of rage, he drew his dagger and tried to stab the bull in the stomach. He missed, and the blade plunged deep into the animal's thigh. As the sacred bull collapsed, bleeding and bellowing in pain, Cambyses turned to the priests and had them whipped. The Apis bull, wounded and desecrated, was taken back to its temple, where it soon died from its infected wound.
This act was the ancient world's equivalent of walking into the Vatican and attacking the Pope. It was a declaration of war on the divine order itself. Herodotus claims that immediately after this act of sacrilege, Cambyses was struck by a great madness, a punishment from the gods for his crime. His behavior, already cruel and erratic, descended into pure tyranny. He began a systematic campaign to mock and destroy every aspect of Egyptian faith. He entered the sacred temples, places no foreigner was ever meant to see, and had the religious statues and images brought out and publicly burned. He opened ancient tombs, including those of the great pharaohs, to gaze upon the mummified remains, mocking the Egyptian belief in the afterlife. He stopped religious festivals, forbade sacred rites, and made a public spectacle of his contempt for the gods that had protected Egypt for millennia. His madness was not confined to the Egyptians. He turned on his own people, his closest advisors, and his own family.
Part 3. The Empire Unravels. Having conquered Egypt's people and desecrated its gods, Cambyses' ambitions swelled into pure delusion. He was no longer content to rule the empire his father had built. He wanted to conquer the entire known world, to march to the very ends of the earth. He planned a grand, three-pronged attack to secure all of Africa. He would send his navy to conquer the powerful city-state of Carthage, lead an army south to subdue the mysterious kingdom of Ethiopia, and dispatch a third force west across the desert to destroy the Oracle of Amun at the Siwa Oasis, a holy site respected even by the Greeks. All three campaigns would end in catastrophic failure, a series of disasters so profound they seemed like the revenge of the gods he had mocked.
Cambyses, hearing of this, finally abandoned his insane quests and retreated back to Egypt, having lost a huge portion of his army, not to an enemy's sword, but to his own catastrophic pride. The fate of the Third Army, the 50,000 soldiers he sent to the Siwa Oasis, is one of history's greatest and most chilling mysteries. This force marched into the vast western desert and was never seen again. According to the stories told to Herodotus by desert survivors, the army was halfway through its journey when a massive, unnatural sandstorm rose up from the south. A colossal red wind buried the entire army, all 50,000 men, under mountains of sand. They simply vanished from the face of the earth. To the Egyptians, the explanation was simple. The gods of the desert had swallowed them whole, protecting the sacred oracle from the blasphemous king. Cambyses' attempt to destroy a god had resulted in his army being erased from existence. While Cambyses was reeling from these disasters in Africa, news arrived from Persia that shattered his world completely. A rebellion had broken out. A man claiming to be his brother, Smerdis, the very brother he had secretly arranged to have killed years ago, had seized the throne and been accepted as king by the people. This was the ultimate paranoid nightmare made real. The ghost of his first great crime had returned to strip him of his crown.
Frantic and enraged, Cambyses gathered what was left of his broken army and began a desperate march back to Persia to reclaim his throne. It was during this panicked journey that destiny, or perhaps the curse of the Apis bull, finally caught up with him. As he was mounting his horse in a town in Syria, the protective cap from the end of his sword's scabbard fell off, leaving the blade exposed. As he swung his leg over the saddle, the sharp point of his own sword drove deep into his thigh, in the exact same spot where he had plunged his dagger into the sacred Apis bull. The wound quickly became infected. Gangrene set in. As he lay dying, delirious with fever, he asked for the name of the town they were in. The answer was Ecbatana. Cambyses went pale, for a prophecy had long ago foretold that he would die in a place called Ecbatana. He had always assumed this meant the great capital city of Ecbatana in Persia, and felt safe. He never imagined it could be this obscure, insignificant Syrian village. Realizing his end was near, he supposedly confessed to his nobles that he had been responsible for his brother Smerdis' demise and warned them about the impostor on the throne. Then, the great King of Kings, ruler of Persia and Egypt, the man who had waged war on gods, died from a clumsy, self-inflicted wound in a dusty, forgotten town far from home.